Today I'm here with Gerda, and I met Gerda at a hearing in Florida. It was a Zoom meeting that was held for some policymakers in Florida. And Gerda, you got an opportunity to share your story. I was wondering if you'd be willing to share your story now with the people watching this video.
Okay, so I'm going to improvise a little bit more. And maybe I start with, I'm not a native English speaker, so sorry for any grammatical mistakes or if I will be hard to understand, but I hope that it will be all right. I was growing up in Poland. And when it comes to Poland, we have a little bit more different policy when it comes to transgender issues. And in some ways, I can say it was more progressive, and in some ways it was more regressive, because we actually started to perform, this gender affirming procedures quite early. I think that the first person who received such treatment in Poland did have surgery in 1960s, so quite, old history. But what is definitely different is that we have a very strict diagnostic criteria. And when I started my transition, it was, I think it was 2014. I was 19. I had just finished my high school. And I started to engage in trans community, though mostly online. I was growing up in a very small city, so I've never actually had an occasion to meet another trans person in person. So I've heard a lot from these older transsexual people, and this is also something different. In 2014, we still use the transsexual term, and it wasn't considered to be offensive. And actually, we had this division between transsexual people. It was those who felt gender dysphoria and wanted to either to go to start hormonal therapy or have some kind of gender affirming procedures. And we have transgender people who just identified with a different gender, but didn't really have any need to transition. This is how we understood this term.
Okay, so in the US and other places, I've heard the term true scum, and I think it's too cute. So there's these two different camps, one of which believes you have to have gender dysphoria in order to be transgender, and the goal is to medically transition, and the other is sort of this QAI plus group that sort of wants to be under the umbrella, but doesn't necessarily even change anything about themselves, just says that they're gender fluid or non-binary or queer. So that's interesting that you had that camp in Poland as well.
Yes, though it was a little bit different because it wasn't like a fight between transsexuals and transgenders. We just understood that those are two different experience, that they are in some ways there were some similarities, but it was different. And actually also used the term transvestite, and I think that it also wasn't used in a in offensive ways. And I still remember guys coming to online support groups and asking, do you think that I'm just a transvestite? Is it just a fetish, or maybe I'm actually a trans woman? And I think right now, it's not a question that would be appropriate. And I think there would be a lot of people who will just assure this guy that such thing as as fetish when it comes to cross-dressing is not a thing, that it's totally just gender euphoria and so on and so on. But when I was growing up, it was still a thing, and nobody really was doing such a big deal out of guy just having a fetish. So I think that actually the dominant mind view when it comes to transgender issues was just something that you would describe as true scum, and transmedicalism, I think, is a correct term. And I think that this was just something that people, in general agreed that this is, how we understand these issues. And of course, there was a little bit more progressive people, but in 2014, well, I actually had a couple of discussions considering non-binary identities. And you know, I, as a moderator of a trans support group, said that this is completely bullshit. And you know, I wasn't cancelled. I just had, I had the, you know, this opportunity to express myself freely, and this just shows how really we, you know, we switched in terms of understanding these issues. Because right now, if I said that non-binary identities are bullshit, I would be like immediately cancelled. So yeah. I think that my personal history is a little bit of mixture of rapid onset gender dysphoria and, you know, this classical transsexualism, because at one point, despite that I'm still quite young, I think I'm 27. So I'm, you know, in that demographic that you usually consider, you know, girls to be suffering from rapid onset gender dysphoria. But I was growing up in Poland, and I didn't really, you know, have that much contact. You know, I didn't have an account on Tumblr, for example, and most people I interacted with were people a little bit older than me, you know, the classical transsexuals. So this is what influenced me the most. But I still remember, you know, looking at the pictures uploaded by people from the US, you know, showing the progression. I remember watching, you know, trans influencers from the USA. So they still had some impact on me. Though I wouldn't say that it was, you know, the classical rapid onset gender dysphoria, especially that I experienced gender dysphoria from a pretty young age, I think. Not maybe, you know, like child, but I just started my puberty, and I felt very extreme discomfort. And
It
you know,
almost reminds me of the difference between you and I. When I grew up, I had gender dysphoria, and it was oftentimes dismissed as penis envy. That was a term that was used a lot to sort of just say, oh, you're being silly. It's just penis envy. Or they would say that I was a tomboy. At no point was I affirmed, and there were no influencers. And so there really wasn't anything for me to kind of latch my gender dysphoria onto, to give me a kind of a history or a picture or a story behind it. Whereas you, it sounds like, had a little bit of that as you were younger with the transsexual community. But then as you got older, you had more influence with online communities.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, you know, my gender dysphoria seems to, you know, come out of nowhere in such a way that it wasn't just, you know, inducted. I wasn't groomed into believing that I'm, you know, uncomfortable with being a girl. I think it was just something that, you know, just came out of me, out of my personal experience. But I remember that when I was 12 or 14, I was watching some kind of medical drama with my mother. And there was that episode that introduced it. You know, it was the first female character that I actually, you know, could identify with. And it was a girl who just went to hospital. She had some, I don't really remember what her medical problem was, but she was a tomboy. You know, all of her interests were usually, you know, more likely to be observed in boys. And she also showed some, you know, genuine discomfort with her, you know, developing body. And it was just something that, you know, was never previously discussed. I just thought that, you know, this experience is very unique to me, that I just hate, you know, my breast, that I pray every night to God that He could, you know, turn me into a boy. And, you know, in the most intense period of my gender dysphoria, I actually started to pray to God to give me cancer. So, you know, my breast or uterus could be removed, because it was very distressing to me. You know, when I saw this girl, I thought, oh, holy fuck, she's like me. And then it appeared that she had some kind of a DSD condition. because during some physical tests, the doctors discovered that she actually had underdeveloped testicle. Uh, yes,
So she
and
was
she was,
intersex.
yes, and she was like, "Oh yeah, that explains a lot. I'm not fully a girl." And it was the first time when I was actually introduced with the concept of transition, because you know at the end there was a very symbolic scene when her mother helped her to cut her hair, and it was just, you know, that she accepted her as a boy. Um, but at this moment, I thought that to medically transition, you need to be intersex. Um, so, you know, I went to my mother, asked her a lot of questions, like would she be able to have children in the future, for example? And you know, my mom actually, I don't think she paid much attention. She didn't think that it was actually, you know, that it could be personal for me. I was just in general a very curious child, so it wasn't concerning for her. Um, but then I started to do my own online research, and then I understood that there are people who are called transsexual, and they are in some way similar to that girl from the TV show, but they don't really have, you know, these DSD conditions. But at this time, the very popular theory explaining why some people are born transsexual was the theory of intersex brain, that for some reason, yeah, your brain doesn't develop in a way that, you know, would match your physical body, and it can trigger some gender dysphoria later when you're developing. And now it seems silly, but for example, people from, you know, that online support group, they were saying that, for example, when if they identified as men, they said that they quite clumsy, and they often hit themselves in their hip area, because they believe that their brain actually believe that their hips should be, you know, smaller. So this was, you know, just the proof that this gender dysphoria is so deeply wired in their brains. And it was very similar for trans women. For example, they said that they are also clumsy, and their brain kind of believes that they should be shorter, that their brain just doesn't, you know, remember that they
Oh,
actually have.
interesting.
Yes.
Because I'm really clumsy. I'm sure I would have been like, oh, there we go. That's why.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And in
But I
fact,
think,
when I was younger, and even still now, I buy clothes
mhm,
that are way too big. And I'm very comfortable in clothes that are way too big. So that's a
yeah,
part of the narrative that could be used to say, oh, well, it's
yes,
because your body thinks it's actually bigger than you really are.
yes, exactly. And I think it's also interesting because I think right now scientists found that autistic people are more common, are more probably to, you know, develop gender dysphoria. And you know, this general clumsiness is also often observable in autistic people. So I see some kind of, you know, overlapping here.
And the sensory defensiveness, which is why I'm
Yes,
always,
exactly.
trying to get my clothes looser than they are.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's amazing how it's sort of how these different diagnoses have been appropriated.
Hmm.
Because I'm reading about eating disorders right now, and I'm like,
Hmm.
and there's another one that feeds right into this narrative because they're uncomfortable with their body.
Yes, and actually, you know, I've never developed like an actual eating disorder, but I think that I was in a risk group in a sense, because I had a lot of, you know, issues with my body. And even when I had a completely normal weight for a girl for my age, I felt, you know, just ugly, fat. And I remember that I started to be ashamed, you know, about just, you know, these curves I was developing very early. And because, you know, I was bullied in elementary school. And, you know, a lot of these things that I had were focusing, you know, on my curves, because I started my puberty very early on. When I was 13, I had, you know, actually pretty much mature curves. So it was also quite traumatic for me that it all happened so quickly. But I knew that, you know, these unhealthy habits that usually people, you know, with eating disorders have are destructive. And I knew that they would affect my body in a very wrong way. So I, you know, started I started to diet once or more, but I tried to keep it, reasonable. But when it comes to gender dysphoria, I was actually, presented with a lot of facts and science saying that it was completely reasonable. And there was no, no warning that it also could be destructive for my mental or physical health.
At the time when you were learning about it, did you have an
Mhm.
idea of medical transition yet, or was it more just being more comfortable with how you expressed yourself externally?
Mhm. So as long as I knew that that boys could do girl things and girls could do boy things, I remember that when I was a child, I was very ashamed of it. For example, my mom took me to shopping, and I was just looking at the boys' clothes, and I kind of wanted them, but I was still
Their
afraid
clothes are
to
so
ask
much
my mother.
better than the girls' clothes.
Yeah, yes, but so I never actually gave myself a freedom to express myself, before I transitioned, um, and
How do you think your
so
mom would have reacted? Do you think she would have been open to you if you said, "Hey, I'm more comfortable wearing boy clothes"?
I think she would accept me because I've never was rejected by my mother. When I announced her that, I think that I'm transsexual, um, she was very calm, and I think that she kind of expected it. Because I also remember when my mom was talking with her friend about me in my presence, and my mom told something like, she's not like other girls, isn't she? And she gave me a very strange, intense look. And I remember this to this day. It wasn't like in that condemning way or something, but I kind of got an impression that she knew what I was thinking at
Do
this
you do
time.
you think maybe she thought you were a lesbian?
Um, nobody said to me, in face that, hey, maybe you're lesbian or are you a lesbian? Though I know that a lot of people were talking about it, behind my back. There are just a bunch of people in my high school convinced that I'm a lesbian, though I never had, a direct conversation about it.
Mhm.
Um, yes, so when I discovered that people can, change their sex, because it was presented in that way, people were talking that after gender affirmation surgery, that nobody would be able to guess that you weren't born female and male. This was actually what was said on the website that I, was doing research on. So even though I knew in some deeper level that I will never be like, an anti-male. Um, I believe that it will be close enough that it will be, totally worth it. Um, so when I was 13 or 14, I started to identify as a transsexual, but in Poland, at this time you needed to be at least 18 to start medical transition, and it was not supported by government in any way. I mean, financially. So
I'm
I
so
know that
thankful that those regulations were in place because I have a feeling if they hadn't been, that you might have started on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones when you were that age, which would have caused
yeah.
irreparable damage.
Yes, I'm absolutely sure that if I was presented with opportunity to do it, I would be like 100%
That's how I
so
feel when
that
I think back about
yeah.
what I was like as a kid. I'm like, I
Mhm.
would have done whatever I needed to do if I thought
Yes,
that was an option.
exactly.
It just wasn't when I was a
Yes.
kid.
Yes, and that's the problem because trans people often say that even with all that health risk, it's all worth it. That they would be, they try to convince other people that they made a good decision by saying that, I would rather die tomorrow than live 10 years as a woman or man. Uh, and I actually had this mindset for a very long time, and I really thought that it's a proof that it was a correct decision for me.
Mhm.
And I realized um, that it was not a sign of my happiness, but rather, the opposite.
Yeah.
When I actually started to feel better, to come out of depression, to find some true sincere friends. Because then I realized that the thought of death started to terrify me, because I started to value my own life. And if you really believe that it wouldn't bother you dying tomorrow, you're not happy.
Right. Yeah, because even people who are in pretty horrible situations can often persevere and find some quality of life. And so if anybody's in the mindset that they would rather die than live another day as they are, there's definitely something going on. And it also strikes me as puberty. You talked about clumsiness, you talked about awkwardness, depression, anxiety. All of those are really hallmarks of puberty. I would say most kids experience those on some level, especially a child like you who developed really quickly, went from, being a kid to being a woman really fast. Those are really normal feelings, but we're not teaching kids that. We're telling them that there's something wrong with them if they have these feelings.
Yes, exactly. And, on all trans sites, that feelings that are completely normal during child development are described as something so unique to trans people. Like, this whole gender dysphoria thing, if you have a genuine gender dysphoria, you're like 100% trans. And actually, when I started to talk about with other people about this experience, when they were asking me what it's like to have gender dysphoria, and when I started to explain my whole journey, and they were like, oh yeah, I had it too. And but when I was firstly presented with that, it made me so uncomfortable. I was like, what are you saying? How dare you compare my personal struggle, with something so common?
Oh, interesting.
But, yes, after some years, I understood that, yeah, these feelings are not that unique. Maybe, the intensity of feelings that I was feeling that was unique.
Well, and
Because
especially if you combine it with some other things like, autism,
yes.
or having, I have a pretty severe dyslexia. And so I really struggled in school. I've talked to kids who, have, speech disorders, or, sexual trauma. All of those things, I think, amplify the difficult feelings kids have during puberty. And so, but I think most kids have, to some extent, some dysphoria.
Yes, exactly. And this is also why I'm concerned about conservatives or gender critical people trying to, a lot of a lot of them say that, being trans equals to having a mental health issue. It's not necessarily true, at least not now, because now we have a bunch of completely normal kids who just identify as trans, either because they're just having these completely normal feelings about their developing body, or they just just want to belong somewhere, and being trans is some kind of subculture for them.
Community.
Yes, the community, exactly. And wanting to fit in is not a sign of mental illness. It's completely normal for children. So this is why talking about trans people in general is so hard, because we have actually a lot of different groups with different needs. For example, there's that woman who described her experiences with deprogramming her child. Well, maybe I shouldn't put it in quotes.
So there was a mother who was at the meeting where we testified.
I think. Yes.
She talked about deprogramming her child, much like her child had gotten involved in a cult. And a lot of us who are watching this feel very much like this is a cult that kids are getting involved with. And I think I really like that you point out that this isn't necessary. I mean, I believe I had a mental health issue. I had a lot going on. And it was like you said, there's sort of the degree of gender dysphoria, something that I had that was so profound that the teachers noticed there was something wrong, versus kids these days who just want to fit in somewhere. And so they get sucked into the cult, which is not a sign of a mental health issue. It's a sign of being a normal kid.
Yes, exactly. This is important to point out, because I don't think that what Gabs did with her daughter would work with me, because actually, my gender dysphoria I think it was also a sign of mental health issues, my trauma. And, this is also a different thing that often worries me because, for example, in that CITES that I did my early research on, um, they were a little bit different. I mean, transsexuals then actually, they agreed that sometimes some mental health issues can look like, a gender dysphoria. So it's important to make sure that your problems are not coming from, your mental or physical issues. And this is also why, during the diagnostic process, you also had to have a bunch of completely physical tests. For example, you needed to have a brain scan to make sure that you don't have some kind of tumor that could, for example, trigger hormonal imbalance, because it could also trigger some identity issues when it comes to your biological sex. But I was pretty much aware that sometimes trauma could also manifest itself as gender dysphoria. But I was completely sure that my childhood was trauma-free. I was still pretty young when I was trying to figure out who I am. And the problem is that I was so sure that my childhood is trauma-free because I didn't really know how a functional family is supposed to look like. So how could I know that something was wrong, with some relationships that I had?
I am so glad you said that, because one of the things that struck me when I became a parent is that when my kids were the age I was at, at certain times, I would think back and be like, oh, my family was so different. Things were so crazy. There was just, but as a kid, I had no idea. I just knew that the other kids in the neighborhood thought I was weird and didn't want to play with me. And the other parents didn't want their kids coming over to my house. And I didn't have a sense of why. And because when you're a kid, you don't. So do you want to describe some of, sort of how that affected you?
Yes, maybe I'll start from some experiences that I think were the most intense. And also I want to talk about them because this was something that I actually honestly don't remember. I just had a conversation with my younger sister, and she told me, hey, do you remember that this, other close family member bullied you a lot? And I was like, wow. I mean, I knew that it wasn't exactly the nicest person, and they actually did a lot of horrible things, but I just couldn't remember a single moment when I was actually bullied as a young kid. And my younger sister started to tell me that this family member never used my name. They always referred to me as it, that thing. And when I entered the room when they were in, and they were like, "Oh, it smells like shit." And yes, and my sister told me that it wasn't. But maybe I should put it this way. My sister, she's a little bit dramatic, so I thought that maybe it was like one or two interactions when we had some kind of disagreement previously, and she tried to make a big deal out of it. But I talked with my mother, and she actually confirmed all of it. And it appeared that I was treated in that way by this person for the first 10 years of my life. So I was like, holy fuck, how did I forget about this?
Well, and it was so normalized, it didn't even register.
Yeah,
wow.
yes.
Oh, I'm so
Maybe
sorry.
no, that's fine. I don't remember it, so I don't feel bad about it. But I'm just, astonished that if it was, I was pretty much aware that sometimes people can repress their traumatic memories. But I thought that it was like, a single experience. And it was like 10 years of my life. And I completely was unaware that it happened to me. And I think it was pretty much traumatic. And it was another trauma that I wasn't completely aware of because I simply didn't, remember it.
Do you think you were disassociating?
Probably because, well, this is also something that a lot of, people with gender dysphoria, regardless if they identify as trans or not, speak about is that we often have this depersonalization and derealization issues. And actually it was quite disturbing to find out how common they are. So I think that, disassociating from this kind of memories could also be as another sign of this much bigger issue.
Can you talk
And
about the other trauma that you had? Do you feel comfortable?
yeah, I think that the one that I'm comfortable speaking of is that I was actually abandoned by my father when I was, I think, 12, 14, maybe.
Mhm.
And the fact that he abandoned our family is not that big deal because he was also a bad person. Really, I think that it was, overall, it was better for us that he just moved on.
It's still
But
your dad. I mean, it's,
yeah,
yeah.
I know, but I don't really think that there is a way that we could, just improve our relationship in a way that wouldn't be toxic for me. But I think that there was, the how he actually disappeared, because he had a divorce with my mother, and he actually was, just he visited us quite rarely, but one day he just disappeared completely, and he didn't pay alimonies. We couldn't, contact him in any way. Even his own mother had no idea
Oh,
where he
wow.
was.
He's
So,
gone.
yeah. And
Wow.
I remember that when I was a kid, I was screening Ithaca website, for missing people, and I was searching for the pictures of unidentified bodies, because
Oh.
yes, I was so sure that one day I will find my father in that, because I was trying to find a reason why we can find him, why we can't contact him.
Wow.
And one day, our uncle from Spain just called us, and he told my mother to turn the TV on, and because he saw our father in a documentary about some hostel in the mountains. And it appeared that he just decided to fuck everything, and he moved, to Bieszczady Mountains. And just watching him chilling there, with the guests in this hostel, playing with a dog, it was really absolutely, devastating for me. So because I just felt, completely worthless. That I could be, just put aside like that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's really
and the
hard when
fact,
when somebody in your life who's supposed to be there to love you and
Mhm,
protect you and be there for you disappears like that. Even if
mhm,
he wasn't a great dad when you were together, there's always, I think, especially, I mean, I don't know for you, for me as a little girl, I always hoped that my dad would one day realize that I was his little girl and love me the way I should have been loved by my father.
mhm.
And I never got that. And it sounds like you never got it either. And it's a sad, I mean, I'm a lot older than you, and I still think about my dad at least a couple times a week, because it's an important relationship for children.
Yes. I don't really think that I think I actually have this pretty much, worked out.
Mhm.
Um,
I hope
I
you
don't
do.
really
If you
think
can
that.
get, if you
Yes,
can have worked it
yes,
out when you're young, it's just, you'll be so much healthier and happier.
yes. At least I hope so.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'm so sure that some experiences are not longer painful for me to
Mhm.
think about them. But then just something unexpected happens, and I just melt down, completely. And I'm so surprised by this reaction, because I thought that uh, that was pretty much neutral with it. Yeah.
So
Mm,
you feel like I've got that, and then all of a sudden
yeah.
something comes
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
So listening to you, I'm thinking when you went to the gender clinic at 19, there's
Mhm.
a lot that you had going on in your life. Did they look at any of that? I mean, it sounds like they did the evaluation, and you must have felt like, well, it turns out that I am transgender because I went through this process, and they're affirming me.
Yeah, maybe I just start with that. We don't really have gender clinics in Poland.
Okay.
Yes, the process looks like that you have a single specialist who is like your main trans doctor. And this person usually has a diploma in sexology. In some cases, they do not have to be a doctor. They could be a psychologist with sexology diploma also. But it's just much, easier when your doctor is actually a doctor, because they can prescribe you hormones and so on. If they're a psychologist, they just can, write a referral note, and you just need to go to find some endocrinologist. So when I went to my doctor, I firstly was referred to psychologist, and I had to, of course, I had to pay for it for myself. It was quite expensive, usually, especially that my first job when I was 19 was pretty trashy. I just earned a minimal wages.
But it was important enough for you to spend the money.
Yes, exactly. I was very fixated on it. And I think that the reason why I was fixated on it is that I actually had 2 suicidal attempts when I was 19. Mm-hmm. And, after my second attempt, when I was, actually, I had to be hospitalized after that. It was a little bit more serious, because right now I can tell, with a hand on my heart, that the first attempt was just, a cry for help or something like that. I didn't really wanted to die, but the second one was, I think, more serious. And at this time, I just knew that I can't continue like that. So this was also the moment when I decided that fuck everything, I'm doing this trans thing. And, I came out to my mother. I explained her how, this whole process will look like. And right after any high school, I started to earn some money to be actually able to afford all of this. And, because I was in such a bad shape when it comes to my mental health back then, this transition thing was kind of an anchor for me. Like, this was just something that was giving me hope that my life can actually change for better, that that all these negative thoughts that I have about myself would eventually disappear when I will get rid of gender dysphoria. So it was, I think it was also something that Tulip talked about, that it's a very easy way to just pack your whole bunch of issues into one thing that you can focus on. And I think it was also something that played a role for me. So when I was referred to psychologist, I actually tried to be very critical and analytical about it. And I wanted to be honest, because, I actually was aware that, that gender dysphoria thing may be just a manifestation of some other issues. So I decided that I will be honest. And I knew that a lot of trans people on this online support group were like, don't mention that because you can get a wrong diagnosis. Don't say about it. If you are, for example, straight, you better say that you're homosexual because it just looks better. Yeah, but I was like, nah, I'm gonna be smart. I'm gonna be better than this. I don't want to fuck my life. So I decided to be, completely open and honest with my psychologist, and it actually didn't save me from everything. And yes, because for example, during my first walk when I was 19 years old, I suffered from something that I think it could be a psychotic episode, because for, I think, a week straight, I had terrible nightmares every day, every night. And, every time I would wake up, I had this sleep paralysis, and I actually had legit hallucination. I was aware it wasn't real, but I was seeing things that wasn't there, and I was hearing things that wasn't there. And those were pretty drastic. For example, I had this, somatic hallucinatory thing. I actually felt like somebody was trying to tear me apart, and it was pretty scary experience. I mean, I was very critical of these things. I knew it was just hallucination and so on, but I knew that it was probably a very bad sign. And I told my psychologist about it. And she was concerned, but she came to conclusion that, because I was critical of these things, that I probably not schizophrenic or something like that. And because it was just, one episode, not just something that, appeared in my life more often, that it could be just a result of prolonged stress caused by gender dysphoria. So, it was
Wow.
all, yes. And when I was talking with my psychologist about my uh, family situation, my psychologist actually noticed that I was, parentified by my mother. Um, and she also came to conclusion that it may be because my mother somehow, sensed that I have a masculine personality.
You were the man of
Yes,
the family.
yes, exactly. That I could replace my father in some way. But I was 19 and I was pretty much fixated that I need transition. So I was like,
Uh-huh. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And now when I'm thinking about it, it's just so it's just pure bullshit, right? And it just, the moment that I
Well, it kind
went
of
to,
just goes to show they can just, I mean, say anything. And if you're
yes,
vulnerable, you kind of
yes,
are like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it just seems that the moment I just entered her office, I was pretty much, destined to transition. That there were just no other result for me.
Didn't sound like
Yeah,
she was giving you other options or other therapeutic approaches. And this
yes,
is in Poland where there's a lot of so-called gatekeeping. I can't
yes,
imagine what it's
exactly.
like in the US where there's, you know, advocates trying to get rid of any kind of oversight.
Yes,
So
yes.
when you started testosterone, did you feel a lot better? Because I've heard
Mhm.
endocrinologists say that testosterone can really make almost any woman feel pretty good initially.
I've never actually, noticed the testosterone's effects on my mind. I
Mhm.
mean, there were some, personality changes when I started transition, but I think they all could be explained, in a matter of psychology, because I also made a lot of changes. When, I actually waited with starting my college with, I didn't want to start college before I start my transition because I was so fixated and I wanted to, open another chapter in my life, the way that I was supposed to be.
As a
Uh,
right, as your true self, as your
yes, as my
authentic.
true self. Yes, yes, exactly. So there were a lot of positive and negative changes in my life that affected both how I acted. It also affected, my relationships with my family. But I don't really think that it was, the effect of testosterone. I think that, well, maybe there was some changes because I think that when I was, younger, pre-transition, I actually was more able to experience very intense emotions. Like I remember the times when I was just like super ecstatic or super, um, uh, I think that it just limited to positive emotions. Like I think that I can just get as depressed and sad and anxious as pre-transition, but I don't think that I can feel that genuine happiness. But maybe it's just the part of growing up. But considering that a lot of people say that testosterone affected their ability to experience intense emotions, I think it could be just a side effect. And it's kind of worrying because I think I'm close to 2 years of being off testosterone, and it's still nothing really changed, about my ability to experience emotions. So maybe it's just, maybe it won't get better, really.
Well, I
Um,
almost wonder too if you're still in a process of grieving and sort of deconstructing what happened to you because you really went through a lot. You had a fairly difficult childhood, lots going on. And then, in my view, you were betrayed by mental health professionals who should have
mhm,
been giving you more appropriate care. You took medications that affected your body in potentially unchangeable ways. And now you're, I mean, it's, to me, I wouldn't be surprising if you're sort of in that process of kind of that post-traumatic assessment period where you're trying to figure out like, okay, what happened? Where am I now? And how can I move forward? So I wouldn't be surprised if your emotional range does come back at some point.
Yeah, maybe, I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's hard to me to say on what part, of this process I am, because my detransition story is not really, I think, a typical detransition story, because, because of this, this environment I was growing up, I was actually pretty much, detached from trans ideology, even when I still identified as trans. For example, I was pretty much aware that, biological sex matters. I still thought that biological men shouldn't compete with females, for example, during sport contests and so on. And I was very much concerned about, males being put in female prisons. And I, when it comes to, more personal issues, I was pretty much aware that I'm not really a real man. And uh, I I never was, that deep into this delusion. I can't say that I was absolutely free of that. But it was just easier for me to detach completely from, this whole stuff when I was already just, one foot in the reality place. Um, well, when it comes to, that my mental transition, because I actually had to go off hormones because of financial reasons. And I was absolutely sure that I eventually, will start my medical transition again, and that I will complete it, because I also was thinking about the surgeries, but I just couldn't afford them at this time. But I was
So
pretty sure that
you didn't initially go off the testosterone because you realized it was a mistake. You did it because you couldn't afford
no,
it.
no, yes,
Okay,
exactly.
interesting. And how old were you when you went off it?
I think I was 25, because yeah, I think I'm pretty much close to 2 years of testosterone. I'm 27, so quick math just tells me that I must be around, 25 at this moment. But actually, I think that ultimate thing um, that just made me realize that it's all so also stupid, and actually it's not really helpful for me, is when I started to read another detransitional stories. And it struck me that how similar could they be, because I was pretty much that people who would eventually detransition are the people who are not really, satisfied with how, for example, hormones change their bodies. Because I had this mindset that if you are a cis person and you would go on hormones, you would actually start to develop reverse gender dysphoria pretty quickly, because this was just very coherent with my mind view of what gender dysphoria and being trans actually means. That you have a male brain in a female body, and it's, and it causes these issues. So if a cis person went on, testosterone, they will have a female brain and a
In a
masculinizing body.
masculinized
Yes.
body. Okay.
Yes. So it was just completely logical for me that those people could, start to feel worse after starting transition. And even though if they, wouldn't be able to spot it right on, they would eventually have to realize that, oh, I just don't like these changes. And it was just very strange for me to read that they could actually love, all these changes, that they could be very excited, because it was something that I also experienced. I really liked, all this masculinization effect on my body. So it just made me realize that there's actually, more factors to consider whether a transition is successful or not. That, being satisfied with changes is just one thing, and there's just a lot of other things that also need to be looked at. And I started to just to analyze my last years, because a couple of last years, because I was also at the time when I started to really improve my mental health in a significant way. And it was just after suffering from mysis crisis. I actually was so, I was very close to committing suicide, because, you know, I thought that, okay, I tried everything. I thought that after transition, I would be able to like myself, that I would be able to make some significant relationships, but I'm still lonely, I'm still depressed, I'm still anxious. So, but you know, it didn't really trigger the thought in me that maybe transition wasn't the right solution. I thought that maybe it was the right solution that just came too late. Maybe, you know, I was just so devastated by the years of suffering from gender dysphoria that I'm not able to be fixed and so on. And you know, when I had this thought that, okay, I just kill myself, I have nothing to lose actually. But then I realized that it's just one thing that I've never done, and I always wanted to do, and it's writing a book, because, you know, I was always a creative person. And so I decided that, okay, if I'm going to kill myself, I just can, you know, dedicate every day until I will finish this book, because it won't matter that, you know, that, that, for example, I would, I would drop out of college, for example, because I'm going to kill myself, so I can do this. I just, yes, I'm just gonna to, you know, focus on book and just that. And well, I mean, I may die, but
You
still
kind
I
of
will.
just gave yourself permission just to like,
Yes,
screw
yes, yes, just
everything. I'm
not
gonna just
everything.
focus on the
Yes,
book and then I
exactly.
can kill myself.
Yes, exactly. That was my mindset, because I thought that if I'm actually so sure that, you know, I'm not going to live any much longer, then I will just finish that one, you know, my childhood dream. And then this was just, you know, the only anchor that I actually had at this time. So, you know, I was writing this book really maniacally. I actually finished it. It was a pretty much massive book, and I finished it, I think, in 6 months. Yes, and I actually sent some copies to two girls that I met from on the internet, and, you know, they weren't my friend back then. They were just girls that I knew, but they became very interested in, you know, in that novel, and they kept me motivated. And then we just started to talk about more personal stuff, and eventually we befriended. And I must say that, you know, they were my first true friends. You know, there was the first moment in my life when I felt, you know, really loved and appreciated. And I just remember that my birthday this year was just, you know, my best birthday ever. Because, you know, I got packages from both of them, and they were just full of gifts, you know, both handmade and bought. And they were also, you know, so meaningful and just so lovely. And
Oh,
yeah, yes, and I was just, you know, looking at this stuff, and I realized that I love them so much. And at this moment, I also realized that it is probably the first time in my life when I don't really have this intense suicidal ideations. That it was also the first time in my life when I started to feel, you know, a little bit excited about my future.
so
Because
interesting, because I think maybe what you found is purpose.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But, you know, but I also sent, you know, when I finished my novel, I sent it to a couple of publishers, and I didn't really have, you know, much hope. But I get a first response pretty quickly, because after 5 days. And
Oh, wow.
you know, I actually got this response from the publisher that I cared the most of, and I would never dream that, you know, they would be interested in my novel. And you know, they didn't exactly say yes. They said that they are interested, but, you know, this they
Which
had
in the
to.
publishing world is huge to even
Yes,
get acknowledged. I mean, that's
yes,
huge.
exactly.
Congratulations.
Yes, and so I'm still in contact with them, and there's still a chance, that this book will be published, but and the final decision is to be made. But still, as you said, it was a pretty big deal for me that actually, a big publisher with a lot of experience actually saw something valuable in my novel. So it was like, oh, damn. So
Yeah.
I just realized that maybe I have a talent, maybe I'm not that worthless.
And you have
So
friends.
yes, and I had friends. And so, when I was thinking about all of that, I realized that I never needed transition in the first place. Like what I needed is, to have some sense of purpose, to be loved, to have something that I could actually care of and care for. And then I realized that why am I doing this thing? Like, is it benefiting for me in any way? Does it improve my life in any way? Because, oh, yeah, okay, all right, I like, this whole masculinization effect. And, I can see some, good sides of, navigating this life and presenting yourself as a man. But, when you realize what price you have to pay, I don't think it's really, worth it, because a lot of people, when they think about detransition and transition, they really focus about, only about this masculinization and feminization effect that it has on your body, but it's also about losing your bodily functions.
Mhm.
And, even if you are completely pleased with the aesthetic results, for example, when you have top surgery, you still have these scars that can literally affect your movement. Your movement can be restricted because of these scars.
Yeah, and
Uh,
nerve damage. You can have nerve damage.
yes, nerve damage, of course. And not even to mention, a panhysterectomy or orchidectomy that just, it's literally losing very important organs. And I must say that as an adult person, fully adult person, because I don't really, consider 19 years old adults. Yeah, I realized that because, when I was 19, I actually thought that, for example, all your ovaries do is just, produce estrogen and, give you your fertility. So when you remove them, all you lose is just, your fertility and, this feminization aspect that estrogen had on your body. But then I realized that the function is actually so much more important. Like they literally keep you healthy. And yes,
Those
you
hormones
need,
are so important, and our
yes.
bodies are designed like each cell in a female's body is designed to thrive with estrogen, and each
Yes,
cell in the male body is designed to be thriving with more testosterone. And so when you switch that, I always use the analogy of putting diesel fuel in a car that takes regular gasoline or vice versa, that it isn't what functions best.
yes, exactly. So, it's not only the matter of deciding how do you want to look,
Mhm.
because if it would be only about this feminization and masculinization effect on your body, then I think that all the trans rights activists that just say that, just acknowledge that you made a personal mistake, would actually be right, because it would only be a question about how do I want to present myself. But it's about how, about losing your bodily functions, about losing your, both mental and physical health. So it's a completely different issue. It's not about, my personal choices, how I want to navigate the world. It's, for example, it took me a really long time to realize that transition had a very negative impact on my body, because I was just focusing on this masculinization effect. And I thought that if it helps me with my gender dysphoria in some way, then it's okay, because it is what it was supposed to do with me. But I didn't realize that, for example, my social anxiety got so much worse, because when I was alone with myself, I actually, I like these changes, but when I had to present myself to other people, I was so anxious that they won't really perceive me, as a boy, that they will see that something wrong with me, or that they will just judge me because, I'm obviously trans. So I started to, avoid people even more. And actually, um, I think that majority of my life is just me sitting alone in my room with myself, with no contact with other people, like literally no contact. And yeah, it was so devastating for my mental health, but I didn't really realize that because I was also a loner as a child, and I didn't have any, impactful relationships. So the moment when I actually, um, started to change that, when I met my friends, I just realized how starved I am, for the social interactions. And I didn't know that it was an issue for me because, uh, I just never had it before.
Yeah, if you've never had it, you don't know what you're missing.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and one of the other things that I think that disturbs me a lot about the trans ideology, it's, damaging to individuals, but also to the narrative that our children are getting, that if you're a girl who has masculine traits, it's because you have a male brain and a woman's body.
Mhm,
And I see that as undermining really important role models for girls, and
mhm,
the idea that, these days any girl who is even remotely gender nonconforming is now getting the message it's because she's
mhm.
born in the wrong body, which is I think harmful to all of society.
Yes, exactly. And no, I actually started to affect, maybe it started to affect me pretty quickly. I mean, when I was growing up, people really didn't know much about, these trans issues.
Mhm.
And it was actually the best time to transition in Poland in that term, that because people didn't know that trans people really exist, it was really easy to blend in.
Mhm.
They could sense that it's something wrong with the way you look like,
Mhm.
but, that light bulb saying, "Oh, that's a trans person," didn't appear because this just wasn't something that they expected. But right now, when the awareness is pretty big right now, when people see me, they like instantly assume that I'm a trans person. And yeah, of course, my voice is kind of telling. But even before I even say a word, they just look at me and they just assume that person had to identify as a man, because
Yeah.
why would they present it that way in other
Yeah, when I shaved my head, everybody sirred me. I was sir to
yeah
everybody. They didn't even
yeah
ask. And part of that is because I don't have, I think I'm pretty androgynous in my shape, and my
hmm
clothes are pretty androgynous. And so they just looked at my shaved head and assumed I was a male. The kids next door used to, they would, when they first saw me with a shaved head, they'd run around saying, "It's the man woman, it's the man woman." They were so like, like, what happened to her? But the fact that something as simple as a shaved head
hmm
indicates somebody's sex or the way they're perceived is really so different than it was even when I was a kid, where someone who had a shaved head would be assumed to be either a butch lesbian, a
hmm
tomboy, or somebody who's recovering from cancer. I mean, those are sort of the categories, I think, when I was a kid. Nobody ever would have thought, oh, well, it's a trans person.
hmm yes, exactly. And um, I think it's also problematic because, well, maybe I'm not going to say that because it's going to be a little bit too personal. Um, but maybe I say some another anecdote, because when I was babysitting my cousins,
Mhm.
and I just saw these kids for the first time in my life. It was a very distant family.
Mhm.
And I think I was 17 and they were like 8 and 10. And that girl, she was an older sister. She was 10 years old, I think. She told me that I'm so awesome, and it is because girls are awesome, right? So, I said, yeah, right.
Mhm.
And, her younger brother told her, yeah, but she's a little bit of a boy, right?
Ah,
Yeah, and I didn't feel offended because I actually identified as a trans, so it was kind of affirming for me. Um, but right now, I'm thinking about it a lot because this boy had like no knowledge of gender
mhm.
identity. He was a little boy growing up in a very conservative area of Poland, so it has nothing to do with all this stuff. And it was pretty visible because he was telling this about someone else. But if that boy, came to a conclusion that he's not really a boy, because, for example, he likes girly things, he would be right now instantly assumed to be trans. Even though, this whole confusion is not really rooted in how he, perceives himself or other people. It is about him not fully understanding what boy and girl categories really mean.
Right. Or even what it means to be human, because I think, I was just talking to a woman who's in school to become a therapist. And she said these days, kids don't understand that life isn't always wonderful and that we're not happy all the time. And so there are these, kids coming in who think that there's something wrong with them when in fact, they're just human. But I think it's really typical for kids to think that, if I put on a dress, I become a girl. It's not, because they don't have the higher cognitive functioning yet. And it's very imaginary and pretend. And when you're, a little kid, you can be different things. You can, that's that play world, that pretend world, the magical thinking is all there. And adults are the ones who are supposed to kind of put some boundaries up and say, you can pretend to be that, but it doesn't make you become that.
Yes, and this is also something, I remember that I had this talk with my younger sister, because we actually discussed, trans issues a lot, and we were usually pretty much critical about it. As I said, from the beginning, I was very critical of, this whole non-binary thing and so on. And she said that, while she is like completely fine with being a woman, she isn't like, sitting and thinking, oh, I'm so womanly, Jesus, I just love to perform, my femininity. It's just something that she doesn't really think about it. And I think that a lot of people, when they say that, I'm a demi boy because I don't really identify like 100% with being a man, this is like completely normal, because no one is like conforming, especially not consciously conforming, to all gender roles or all gender stereotypes.
And can you imagine how exhausting it would be if we had to do that? I mean, if we just
Yes, exactly. I mean, maybe some insecure people are trying to do that, especially men, but it's not about
I see
gender
some
identity.
Well, and I was talking to, I think it was Menno, who's in the UK, and he was talking about being with a friend who is trans identified, and how exhausting the friend seemed to, to have to maintain that act. I mean, the performative aspect of it, because really, men can't become women can't become men. And so in order to perform it, you have to be on stage all the time, and that's got to be exhausting.
Yes, I think that in most cases of trans people, there is that aspect of performance with their, trans identities. There are some people who will try to say that no, that's their actual self and so on. But to be honest, when you really care about being perceived as a woman or as a man, you try to do everything, to just make sure that you will be perceived in this way. And it also means, changing things about your behavior, about how you move, and you just start to be very conscious about all these things. Like, for example, if you are just a woman and you are walking, probably don't really put much attention to whether or not you, for example, move your hips, a lot when you walk. But when you're a trans person, you start to think about it a lot. And I noticed something funny, because the moment a trans person will learn that, some behaviors, some even, purely physiological things are somehow sex related, they start to be very conscious and worry about it. My friend told me that there is she met some young trans identified girls who had blinking dysphoria, because they read that boys blink, rarely, and girls blink often. And they were like, oh my God, I'm blinking all the time. That's totally clocking me. And I'm so dysphoric about it.
Oh
And
no.
yes, no, it sounds funny, but
It
those
sounds so
girls,
sad though. I mean, it just sounds like this is not authentic. This is
yes,
the
exactly.
antithesis of authenticity.
Yes, and those girls are genuinely anxious
Right.
because of how
It's
they
like
blink.
the dysphoria is very real, but it's
Yes.
because of the messages that they're giving
Mhm.
themselves and the messages that society's giving them, that they haven't been taught to kind of understand that that those are false messages, and that they can reject those and be comfortable with who they are without having to worry about how many times a minute they're blinking. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we end?
No, I think I'm fine.
Well, I'm really grateful for your story and for your willingness to share it. I think that your story is very cautionary because it
Mhm.
shows that even adults can fall into this mindset, and how important it is that we protect kids from it. Because I just keep thinking, if you had lived in a country where these interventions were provided, you likely would have been on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and had a mastectomy before you were 15.
Yes, especially that my mother was actually affirming. But there's a lot of misconceptions about affirming parents, I think, because while I do agree that transitioning children is a child abuse,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the parents are inherently abusive. They could be. There are cases when you see that the parents are over controlling when it comes to their kids. But also we need to also understand that parents are under a lot of pressure. When they want to figure out what does being trans actually mean, they will Google it, and the first thing that they will notice is just a lot of websites telling them that the kid will kill themselves if they won't get affirmed. So I'm pretty sure that my mother would go with it if she would come to believe that it's the best solution for me. Yeah, she would
And
go
she
for
also
it.
had medical experts who were saying that
Yes.
you were in fact transgender. So for somebody who's not aware of everything that's going on out there, I mean, obviously she loves you and she wants you to be healthy and alive. And the narrative that she would get and other parents are getting is that you must affirm. And that's one of the reasons why I think your speaking out is so important, and other people speaking out is important, because parents need to know that sometimes healthcare professionals get things very wrong.
Yes, especially that, a lot of people think that just, better, stricter gatekeeping, better safeguarding is just a solution. That, transition is okay, but just not for all people. And we just need to make sure that only the right people are, transitioned. But I think that, experiences of people growing up in places when the gatekeeping is really strict and the transition still brings poor outcomes, I would say, says that it's not really the right solution. And even if it would be a right solution, we do not actually know how to, find these actual trans people that could benefit.
There's no good diagnostic criteria to say
Exactly.
this is a person who will thrive and this is a person who won't. And this is
Mhm.
where I feel like the mental health professionals have, it's sort of like they've abdicated responsibility rather than trying to find better treatments for people who struggle with gender dysphoria. They've just said,
Mhm.
oh, we'll just put them on this path. And that to me feels like they just have given up, and it's irresponsible and lazy on their part not to, because obviously I'm an example that you can have severe gender dysphoria and survive it. It's survivable. And you're an example, and Richie's an example, and Abel's an example, and there were other people at that meeting who were examples, and they don't have any litmus test for whether or not somebody's going to continue and persist with gender dysphoric feelings, the rest of their lives. And even if they do, we know that there are people who are uncomfortable with their nose, they're uncomfortable with their bottom, they're uncomfortable with their arms, and they're able to survive those difficult feelings. This is the one area where we say, oh, oh, well, we can't help you manage those feelings. We're just going to put
Mhm.
you on this path to transition.
Yes, exactly. I still actually feel dysphoric. Maybe it's not that intense as when I was young.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if these feelings, will ever perish, but um, the thing that I realized is that gender dysphoria is just another kind of emotion.
Mhm.
And if you are in poor mental health, those negative emotions are just simply overwhelming. But when you start to get better, you also are more capable of managing your own emotions. So I don't really understand um, why health professionals do not really have this kind of mindset. That is just that the patients just feel intense negative emotions, and how can we make them more comfortable with these feelings? How can we make them survive all of this?
Mhm. And we know that people can survive very difficult feelings
Mhm.
if they're provided with skills. And that's one thing cognitive behavioral therapy really helped me, because it gave me the skills that I need so that when I'm struggling with feelings like,
Mhm.
there's something wrong with me, I'm not like the other women. I can write the stories that I'm telling myself to say, no, 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 this is just, you're uncomfortable, you're stressed, you're dealing with, a difficult thing, rather than, oh, that's it, I'm born in the wrong body.
Yes.
Well, I really appreciate your being so open and sharing your experience. I think that it will help others to learn about what you went through and to have your perspective.
Thank you.